songs before this today, how easily sometimes we get distracted from God, pulled away. I just noticed coming out of the house today, I was kind of like, had that slow moat going on and wasn't really ready to worship yet today. And how once I got here, we started singing how, I just livened up. We get so busy in our lives sometimes. I know I've taken on a new role at work, and I carry around two of these things now. One for work, one for my own personal reasons. And life consumes us. But man, once we get here, we get back in the swing of things, it's nice to be reminded of why we actually exist. That's to worship and praise Him. So we're in the final week of the series called Hope in the Dark. And it is based on a book that Craig Rochelle wrote, Pastor Craig Rochelle from Life Church. And it is not a series for everybody. It is not your typical sitcom sermons, we've said, where you come in, we give you a problem like a sitcom would, and in a half hour we work everything out and everything's all happy and good by the end of it, including commercial breaks. It's not what this has been about at all. We have been in the book of Habakkuk, and I say that for a lot of you guys are like, God bless you. But Habakkuk is where we've been, and the first two chapters of Habakkuk are not happy chapters in Habakkuk's life. Habakkuk was a minor prophet in the Old Testament. He was around about 600 years before Christ, and where most prophets spoke to the people on behalf of God, he was the opposite. He spoke to God on behalf of the people. And chapter 1 of Habakkuk was all about wondering. Because what was happening was Habakkuk was wondering, why is it that what I see with my eyes doesn't align up with what I believe in my heart? And it became a situation of God. Why are you unfair? Why don't you do something to stop this? And chapter 2 is even worse, because if chapter 1 was about wondering, chapter 2 is about waiting. And waiting is difficult and hard. And what we learned about in chapter 2, we said, when you're waiting, though it linger, wait for it. Continue to wait, because when it's God's time, if it's not God's time, you can't force it. And if it is God's time, you can't stop it. That's what we say. Now, chapter 3 is a little different, because before chapter 3, God comes to Habakkuk and says, look, I'm going to amaze you. I'm going to do something you won't believe. And he's all exciting, saying, okay, here comes the redemption. It's going to be all good now. And what does he do? He raises Habakkuk's enemies. All right? But number 3 is about a change in tone. Number 3 is about hitting a reset in Habakkuk's life, okay? So the last verse of chapter 2 says this. It says, but the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. So we're resetting the mood all of a sudden. Hey, don't worry about it, because God is where he belongs. He is in his temple, all right? So we're hitting the reset button. And Habakkuk has been confused, but in that confusion, we learn to trust God. And he's been unsettled, and when we're unsettled, we learn to embrace God for what's happening. So, I got this fun word for you. Ready? Out of Habakkuk 3, verse 1. Ready? Here it comes. A prayer of Habakkuk, the prophet of Shigionoth.
Very good.
Shigionoth, yes. Shigionoth. So you might say, well, what does Shigionoth mean? It's just the plural of Shigion. Got it? You understand now? All right, so what is Shigionoth? Okay, so we don't have a lot to tell us what Shigionoth means, but it is what it is. It's actually directions on how to sing. Directions on how to sing. It's a musical term is what it is. So this is kind of directions. I might give you directions as a congregation. I might tell you, all right, well, sing this next song like it's a love song. Or we might say, something like, all right, show your jazz flair, show your jazz hands in the next song, or you know what, sing the next song like it's hip hop. And I think we do pretty much all of this kind of music in this church, and we're probably one of the few churches that do all that, enough to where we make people get up and walk out before. So I'm always proud of that. But what it is, it means to show emotion, a strong emotion, to have wild, passionate singing, to have rapid changes of rhythm, to have high spirited praise, vigorous enthusiasm. This is what Shigionoth means, okay? Now, this one article that's out there says that Shigionoth is not a whiny, crying your beard ballad. That's not what it's about. But it's a praise punctuated with exclamation marks. All right, so if you can think of that, this is going someplace. It's upbeat, right? So really for Habakkuk, what this comes down to being is comes down to praising God before God does what you want him to do. And often we don't do that. We wait for God to act and then we praise him. Where this is telling us, hey, praise God before God does what you want him to do, right? The most passionate praise that we can have is praise before the provision. This isn't about praise for what God is, but who he is. Or not what God has done, but who he is, okay? And Habakkuk 3:2 says, Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. Lord, repeat them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. So we're going someplace now. This is Habakkuk coming through. God, I know who you are. I know what you've done. I know you're going to continue to do these things. And there's a song that was written, I don't even know the title of the song, but if you look at these words, it's, I've seen you move, talking to God, I've seen you move, come move the mountains. I've seen you move the mountains. And I believe I'll see you do it again. You made a way where there was no way, and I believe I'll see you do it again. You know, I know you can do these things. I've seen you do these things, and I know and I believe that I will see you do it again. God, I've seen you work. I know your power. I know what you're capable of. And I know I'm going to see you do it again. And if you remember all the way back to the very first week of this series, we talked about the roller coaster kind of your faith, where you're down here and all of a sudden you accept Christ, and all of a sudden you're way up here and you're floating high, and then something goes bad in your life and you start to come down, and when you start to come down, you can either just come right back to where you were and say, forget this religious thing, or forget this God thing, it's not for me, or you can continue to ride it out and be in the valley. And that's what it's about today, is what do we do when we're in the valley, when things aren't going well. And the first thing we do is remember the goodness of God, okay? Chapter 3, verse 3 says, God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. His glory covered the heavens, and his praise filled the earth. All right? Now, we hear Teman and Paran, and we hear those, and we're not sure what they are. They're two places God took his people for refuge after delivering them from Egyptian bondage. So these are good places for these people to be. Teman and Paran, good places. That's where God took us for refuge, all right? So, hey, take us back there again, God, right? Because what Habakkuk is saying is, hey, remember how you thought there was no way out? Remember that? Remember how God changed Pharaoh's heart? Remember how when it seemed like there was nowhere to go, God parted the sea and he provided us dry land to walk on. That's what Habakkuk's saying. Remember that? Remember the goodness of God when it seemed there was nothing else that could be done, when there was nowhere else for you to go. Remember the goodness of God, how he provided for us, right? And then he goes on, he continues, He says, his splendor was like the sunrise. Rays flashed from his hand where his power was hidden. Plague went before him. Pestilence followed his steps. He stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. So Habakkuk, through all this, is remembering all that God had done. And so many times I think we need to remember what God has done for us when it seemed like all was lost. When it seemed like our backs were against the wall. What did God do? He starts to remember, hey, you know what? God, remember how he gave bread from heaven? Remember the food from the ravens? Remember how he gave you water from a rock? Remember how he caused the sun to stand still? How he shut the mouth of hungry lions? Remember how he raised the dead? All these things that he did. And I'll use this example from Craig Rochelle, since it's his book. I'll use a couple of examples that he uses to explain this stuff. But when Craig was in college, he wasn't always the best student. And he will tell you in many different sermons that you listen to how he wasn't that great of a guy and how he liked to party and get drunk and a lot of things that people do in college. And he says one day his sins kind of caught up to him and he had this change of heart and changed his life, and he decided, you know what, I'm going to start a Bible study. So he decides to schedule a Bible study, and the day of the Bible study he's going to his class and he realizes, I don't even own a Bible. What do I do? And he went to that class. He got out of the class, and as he was coming out of class, there happened to be a Gideon standing there who says, young man, would you like a free Bible? I said, wow, how God just provided for him that day. And he also talks about how just praying to meet somebody when he did accept God. And he did change his life around. And he knew that there was no more hanky-panky in his life with any other woman. So he went out on a date with this woman, and she wasn't quite where he wanted her to be spiritually in her life at that point in time. And he kind of stopped the date early, and she said to him, she goes, you know what, you are weird. And a couple weeks went by, and that same girl came up to him and said, you know what, you are weird, but I just met somebody who is equally weird, and I think you should meet her. And she introduced him to who became his wife. So they were both in that same place at that time. So very, very interesting. But some of you guys can relate to things where God just seems like he shows up at the right time. Have you ever been down to the last dollar in your account, and you've already gone through, the cushions of the couch, and you're looking, you're wondering, what am I going to eat for the next week? And somehow that refund check shows up, that insurance check shows up, something that you weren't expecting just shows up, like God just provided it at the right time. Have you ever had something you thought, oh, this is going to take forever to heal, and then all of a sudden, way before it's supposed to heal, you're healed? It's just like God answers a prayer or something like that. Sometimes when we're in the valley, we have to think back and remember how God has helped us. We can't always just look at the future situation, but we have to remember that God has showed up in the past, and he can show up again. And it might be when you're going to church and all of a sudden you just hear that verse that seems like it's talking to you that day. It might be that you see the song that seems like it's talking to you. It might be that someone prays for you in just a certain way. You hear something in a prayer that someone does. It might be something, how someone comforts you, or gives you strength, or provides for you, or protects you, or something like that, that tells you that God is still in his temple. And God has been there in the past, and he's still there now. And you may have to remember that God, you did it before, and I know you can do it again. So when you're in the valley, remember what God has done. And the second thing we need to remember when you're in the valley is you are not there to endure it. Right? We think this when we think of Habakkuk. If you remember the one week we talked about what Habakkuk meant. And it meant to wrestle and embrace God. So we're not in the valley to wrestle and endure it. We're there to wrestle and embrace it. To Habakkuk, he felt like his enemies were winning. The Babylonians are winning, and they were winning, right? But he had to tell himself, even though the Babylonians were winning, you know what? My God is still on the throne. Still on the throne. My God has always been good. My God has always been faithful. And sometimes that means we just have to look the truth in the face, right? We have to look the truth in the face, and we have to look what's ahead of us in the face, and we have to say, you know what? My God's always been there, and I still trust in my God. I embrace his goodness. I know he can because he's done in the past. So, Habakkuk chapter 3, 16 through 18 says this. I heard and my heart pounded. Okay, so I'm not hearing good things. All right, I heard bad things. I heard bad things and my heart pounded. My lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones and my legs tremble. Right? He's going to raise up my enemies. That's what he hears. I'm going to raise up your enemies. Yet, I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation invading us, right? I know it's going to be brutal. I know many are going to die. I know children may suffer. I know there's going to be bloodshed. I know this is going to happen with the enemy being raised up. But he goes on and says, though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen, and no cattle in the stalls, right? Yet, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in my Savior. How many of us have the strength and the faith to do that? That when it looks bad, when all we see is the negative ahead of us, how many of us can still rejoice in God? How many of us can still be joyful in our Savior when things aren't going well? You know what? Yeah, my child hasn't been healed yet, right? My prayers haven't been answered yet. I don't see a way, God, I still need a job. My marriage is still a mess and in shambles. I'm still hurting. I had dozens of reasons not to rejoice. But I still trust in God. I still trust my Savior. Habakkuk wrestled and embraced. I'm going to tell you one more Craig Rochelle story from the book. And this has to do with, they were at a party, and there was a zip line that somebody had made, and the kids weren't supposed to be on the zip line because they weren't big enough for it. And his little daughter decided she was going to do it when nobody was looking. And she got on the zip line, and she came down the zip line and couldn't stop and went face first into a tree and knocked her out cold. And there was blood everywhere. And he said they got her in the car, they rushed her to the hospital, and they were asking her asking him what her name was, and he was like, I can't remember. Just one of those moments where everything is just too much to control. You're going through so much. And finally she woke up, and they explained to him what they were going to have to do, and they said, but what we need you to do is to hold her down. And he said he got down and he held his daughter down, and she looked him in the eyes, and she started saying, no, Daddy, please, Daddy, don't let them, Daddy. She goes, I just want to go outside and play, Daddy. Daddy, come out and play with me. And she just kept yelling, no, Daddy, no, Daddy, no, Daddy. And she wrestled with him, and the entire time that she wrestled with him, he said her arm was around her neck, embracing him. She was wrestling and embracing her Father. Isn't that where we should be with our Father? We don't understand. She didn't understand. Yes, what they were doing was for her good. She didn't understand it. She wrestled and embraced it. And we may not understand what we're going through with God and why He's putting us through the things that we're being put through, but we wrestle and embrace it. Not wrestle and endure it. We wrestle and embrace it. Shigionoth isn't a half-hearted song to God. It comes from the depths of our soul. It's a faith that worships God still when everything feels wrong. It's a faith that believes when I don't see what I want to see, I'm still going to have faith. It's a cry from our hearts, but it's still a declaration of prayer and praise for God, even during the pain. So chapter 3, Shigionoth, praise before the provision. Praise with exclamation marks. It's all about wrestling and embracing what's happening in our lives when we're in the valley. It's about, I don't know, God, what you're doing. I don't even know if I can take it. But I'm going to stay here and be faithful. Yeah, you know what? My child is still sick. Things aren't going right. I'm still a mess. But I'm still going to trust in you. And it's not just making the best of a bad decision, it's a situation. It's deeper than that. Verse 19 says, "The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to tread on the heights." You're in that valley. If you stay, and you stay devoted and faithful to God, eventually, you start to climb back up. And when you do that, man, it'll make your feet like a deer. We will learn when everything's good, especially when we first become Christians, we learn to enjoy God on the mountaintops. And it's a great time to be alive when we're on the mountaintop, right? That's when we learn to enjoy God. But we learn to trust Him when we're in the valley. Chapter 1. Don't walk away from God. Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Don't quit on God. In chapter 2. Because if you quit in chapter 2, you won't have a chapter 3 full of faith. Without wondering of chapter 1 and waiting of chapter 2, you won't get the reset of chapter 3. And you'll never experience what God may have in store for you. And you'll never reach the mountaintop again. Stay faithful. Stay strong. And let God work in His time, not yours. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we are so happy and so glad to know that even when we're in the valleys of our lives, that you are still in control. You are still in the temple. You are still watching over us, and we know that perhaps the reset is just around the corner, but better things are coming. But God, even if you don't act in our time, even if it takes longer than we want it to take, I pray, God, that we remain faithful. We continue to put our trust in you, and we continue to do the work that you give to us to carry out your love, your grace, and your mercy into the rest of the world. God, so many people are out there hurting, including ourselves sometimes. And we just pray that those individuals don't give up their hope and their faith either. As we watch the news and we see so many disgusting acts against other individuals in society, we pray, God, that something comes and something touches individuals and changes them and helps us move in a different direction. Help us love each other again. Help us to remember that we're all people and we're all trying to struggle and we're all trying to make it in this world. But the one thing we need in this world and in this country, if we want to heal as a country, is we need you back in our country. God, we ask that you come back into our country and that people's hearts change